So, this is one topic that may seem very basic to some of you, but is also one that should form kind of the basic foundation of any and all nutrition plans. Making sure that your macronutrients are balanced in your daily intake and even in your specific individual meals and snacks will help in so many areas, like as far as blood sugar regulation, energy levels, weight loss, hormone balance, and even with satisfaction and a decrease in cravings. Um, so I want to kind of start here and let's move on. So, what does balancing your macros mean? Macros is just a short term for macronutrients. So, macro meaning this is a food we need in large amounts in the body. It includes three different macros, and that's going to be your protein, your fat, and your carbs. The idea of balancing these foods is important because each one of these nutrients are beneficial in our bodies in different ways. This is why when we follow diets that cut out any single one of these macros, they're quite difficult to maintain over the long term and actually can cause us issues in our bodies and with our energy levels, with our satisfaction and our cravings. So, the idea of balancing the macros doesn't mean that we're consuming the same amounts of all three of them, but is more about just making sure to include each of them into our meals and snacks. So when we consume balanced meals and snacks, we're also balancing our blood sugars, we're balancing our energy levels for more that long lasting energy throughout the day, and our hormone levels as well. Not necessarily just estrogen, progesterone, but things like insulin, cortisol, um, and also that's going to help with balancing our blood sugars and just helping us to feel better during the day. So, first, let's start with protein because I can't begin to express the importance of this macronutrient. I've seen it make such a difference in my clients' issues with weight loss, with their energy levels, and just with their ability to get rid of those cravings and to feel a little bit more in control with their intake. So, starting with appetite regulation, protein is known for its ability to actually help us to feel full, or it's another word we call that satiety. When we eat foods that are high in protein, it actually promotes that release of a hormone in our brain that tells us we're full, we're satisfied, right? So we can understand that when we're not getting enough protein, we might find that we struggle with the cravings. We might find that we overeat meals more. And specifically, when it comes to protein, um, we actually burn more calories during the digestion of protein than we do with carbohydrates or with fat. It doesn't mean that all, the calories in that protein source are burned up in the digestion, but it just means that um, compared to fats and carbs, when we eat a higher amount of protein, it actually can provide a little bit more of that calorie deficit that we're shooting for weight loss or specifically fat loss. The third thing protein does in the body is building and maintain muscle, which is such a huge piece as women and as we get older. We tend to lose bone. We also lose muscle, and that affects our metabolism. We're going to find that our metabolism and just the number of calories we're burning on a day-to-day basis decreases, and that can contribute to our difficulty with weight loss as we age. Um, so when we're in that calorie deficit for weight loss, there's a risk of losing both fat and muscle. But when we consume an adequate amount of protein, as well as we incorporate strength training into our exercise routine when we are trying to lose weight or lose fat. It helps us to preserve that muscle and focus on fat loss, which is going to be beneficial for our metabolism in the long run and actually helps more with that long term weight management. The fourth way protein is beneficial is when specifically with blood sugar regulation. So when we choose high protein foods in every single meal and snack, especially when we're consuming those carbohydrates, which can cause blood sugar spikes, it's going to help us to stabilize our blood sugar levels by slowing down that absorption of those carbs. So it's always important to have protein with every meal and snack, and really specifically whenever you're consuming carbohydrates, because that's going to prevent those rapid blood sugar spikes and falls, which we can see sometimes we'll see an energy increase and drop. So it helps more with that long lasting, longer term energy levels. Um, and then lastly, specifically when it comes to fat burning and metabolism boost, so protein can actually enhance our body's ability to burn fat for energy. It stimulates the production of hormones that promote fat breakdown and that release of our fats from our fatty tissue. So it has also that high satiety value, or that ability to fill us up and make us feel full and say I'm done eating, right? So super important to incorporate protein into every meal and snack. Here's a list of kind of some higher protein foods. I'm not going to go through each and every one, but when it comes specifically to weight loss, we want to choose those leaner cuts of meats, specifically. So leaner cuts of beef are going to be those with the last part of it is loin, like sirloin or tenderloin. Um, Poultry, great source of lean proteins, especially like in the boneless, skinless. Eggs, dairy products, things like yogurt and cottage cheese, and then those complex carbohydrates like whole grains like quinoa, beans, and legumes, so lentils, chickpeas, black beans, garbanzo beans, all these are going to be great sources of protein. So if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, those beans and legumes can be your primary source of protein. They're also a great source of fiber. So let's move on to carbohydrates. Carbs, we know from the keto diet and those diets that actually really restrict the carbohydrate intake, we know that this can push our body and force it into burning fat as energy. It's also called ketosis. Um, but it's just not an efficient um, energy source for our body, and our body doesn't necessarily love it, right? Because our body needs carbs. They're the primary and most efficient source of energy for our body. um, our body breaks those down into that basic form of glucose, and our cells can use it for energy. And it's particularly important when it comes to our brains and our muscles. Our brain relies heavily on glucose as its main fuel source. So you can see where, sometimes when we're really hungry, or maybe if we're restricting our carbohydrates, we might find that we struggle with focus. You have a harder time focusing or being productive or motivated because your brain doesn't have that primary source of energy that it likes to use. It's also huge when it comes to muscle fuel. So when we're working out, our body will pull those carbohydrate stores and use it as energy. So it's called glycogen. Um, and our muscles want to use this. So you might find that your muscles feel a little heavier. They're not as quick. You might find that you don't get as good of workouts or have as good of endurance when we're really restrictive on those carbohydrates. When it comes to metabolism, carbs are also super important. We know that insulin is that hormone that actually helps our body to take in that extra glucose and pull it into the cells for energy, and that process is crucial for maintaining our blood sugars in a normal level for blood sugar regulation. And then lastly, gut health. Carbs and complex carbs are just so important when it comes to our gut health, and we know that our gut and our digestion is directly related to our immune system and to our brain, as far as mental and emotional health. So the fiber that we get from these complex carbs can help. It provides that bulk, helps us with digestion. It can prevent things like constipation, and it can also prevent. It can kind of bulk up those stools and prevent diarrhea as well. So fiber is key to digestive health, as well as those good, healthy um, probiotics, which are those healthy bacteria. and carbs are kind of their primary source of nutrients. So you can see why it's all just this very important cycle. It's important to get those quality sources of carbs. The biggest thing with carbohydrate is that we are trying our best to choose the carbs that are less processed, which basically means in the processing, it typically removes the fiber from it and it'll remove the healthy fat from it. So those less processed sources of carbs are going to be ones that are higher in fiber. They still have that intact germ on the outside, which has those healthy fats. So it's important to try to choose as much as we can, trying to choose those carbs that come from more of those whole unprocessed sources of carbs. And let's chat about what are kind of some higher quality carb foods. I won't go through each of these, but these kind of just give you a few. It's not an exhaustible list, but this is just a few of the options. Quinoa is that, full grain, rich and, high in protein as well as fiber. Those sweet potatoes are just going to, they have a bit of a lower glycemic index, meaning they're not going to cause the blood sugar spike that regular potatoes might. Not to mention, they have some really great lycopene in there, which is an awesome antioxidant. Um, Oats are high in that soluble fiber. So, like when it comes to heart disease, you've heard that soluble fiber can be beneficial. Can help to lower cholesterol and can provide more of that sustained energy. Brown rice, the only difference between that and white rice is, like I said, it's less processed. It still has that fiber on the outside. So it's going to be higher in fiber than your white rice. When it comes to pastas, I think the best way to go is trying to choose maybe pastas that come from either beans and legumes. So there are ones that are made from chickpeas, like banza pasta, or made from lentils, made from black beans. There's all sorts of them out there. Um, or you can choose whole wheat pasta too. So those are going to be just a bit less processed. They're going to be higher in fiber and they're going to provide you with more protein than a standard, more processed pasta does. When it comes to fruits, the biggest thing is that, juice is just going to provide us with a lot of the liquid and the sugar that come out of fruits. So if we can consume whole, real, raw fruits, that's going to be better. Those berries are going to have a little bit lower glycemic index than other fruits. When it comes to vegetables are not a large carb source other than those starchy veggies that are going to be like your corn and your peas, squash, those kind of things. But we'll talk about those non-starchy vegetables later. But typically vegetables only contain a small amount of carbs. And then lastly would just be some other whole grain sources, and that would be like buckwheat and barley. The key is just focusing on those whole kind of minimally processed foods to maximize the nutritional benefits. Um, so let's move on and talk a little bit about vegetables. So since non-starchy vegetables contain only small amounts of protein and carbs and minimal fat, they don't fall into any of the three macro categories, but they are still incredibly important in as part of a balanced diet. They provide us loads of fiber and those micronutrients, so they're essential for our gut and digestive health and really that feeling of fullness that we were talking about. So trying to eat vegetables um, with every meal if possible, if not multiple servings per meal. I usually recommend 5 to 7 servings a day. That might seem like a lot, and you might say, "Oh, how am I going to, get that in?" We're going to talk about some different ways to do that, but even trying to find ways to incorporate it into your breakfasts, whether it's putting, spinach in your smoothies or some veggies in your scrambles, making, breakfast muffins even with zucchini or squashes or pumpkins. I think are a great way to try to get it in. Sometimes you have to kind of think outside of the box when it comes to breakfast. And then, even if breakfast is difficult, just making sure you're having, at least a couple servings with your lunch and dinner meals. Those veggies, they have, they're basically dense in those nutrients just because meaning they have They're loaded with vitamins and minerals. They have those great antioxidants that helps to rid our body from those free radicals, which can cause disease, can cause um, faster aging process. They're a great detoxification system. They have loads of fiber, which help with our gut health. Um, they can be especially beneficial when it comes to weight management because they have a lot of water in there, they have a lot of fiber, and they can just help us to feel fuller for longer. So let's talk about some different kind of good quality vegetable choices. I think the biggest thing when it comes to vegetables is just finding ones that you enjoy. I mean, even if I tell you that spinach is the number one top vegetable and you say I can't stand spinach, then I'm not going to say, "Oh, you're just missing out if you don't get spinach." There are many other dark green leafy type vegetables that are going to give you some of those same vitamins and minerals. And I think the biggest thing with vegetables, it's as much as you can have a variety, the better, just because each of them, those different colors, just mean that they contain different beneficial antioxidants and nutrients. So, just finding ones that you enjoy, whether you like them raw, whether you like them cooked or slightly steamed or put inside of a dish or eaten by itself, however you enjoy it, it's just the fact that you're doing your best to try to consume them because they are so amazing for you. Um, so, moving on to fats as our last and third final macronutrient. So, fats typically recommended that you have about 30% of your total calories coming from fat. Fats are beneficial. When we totally cut fats out of our diet, we can find that we are more hungry because they do provide us with some of that fullness or satiety. They give us that longer lasting energy because our body is slow to digest them, and they don't cause blood sugar spikes. So they also, like protein, are going to help to slow down the digestion of carbohydrates. So trying to consume those meals with all three of those macronutrients is what's going to help with that blood sugar regulation. So fat, it's kind of that concentrated form of energy storage. When we're not eating much, our body can actually pull fat out of storage and use it for energy. It provides us with some great insulation and temperature regulation. I think for most people, that's not a problem. Hormone production. I don't think people realize how important fat is for the making of hormones like estrogen, testosterone, but not only sex hormones, but also like cortisol, vitamin D. They're derived from cholesterol, which is a type of fat. So these hormones are so important in the body. They can, if you have issues with fertility or reproduction, metabolism, and also our immune system regulation. When it comes to cell structure and function, that's, our cells are made up of fats called phospholipids. So obviously it's important for our cells, and then also important for us to absorb those good fatty the fat soluble vitamins, which would be your vitamin A, your vitamin D, your vitamin E and K. So when you are supplementing with those vitamins, like if you're taking your vitamin D because you're not getting a lot of sunlight, or if your vitamin D levels are low, you're going to want to take it with a little bit of a fatty food, a fatty snack, or a meal, because that's going to help your body to absorb it a little better. So, what are some high quality fat foods? People always are asking, like, well, how do I know if it's a good quality fat or not? And fat is similar to carbs in that I say, if you can choose ones that are less processed, that's better, right? So, the closer they are to real whole food, the better. So, things like avocados, great source. They have loads of monounsaturated fats. Olive oil, if you can do the extra virgin, just meaning it's less processed than the regular olive oil, that's going to be best. Coconut oil is high in saturated fat, but it also is very unique because it contains medium chain triglycerides, which actually have metabolism effects. Does that mean you should load up on coconut oil? Absolutely not. It's still a fat. Fats are very concentrated form of calories. So 1 gram of fat is 9 calories as compared to a gram of protein or carb is only 4. So you can see where it's just in each gram, it's just more of that concentrated form of calories. So when we're looking at weight loss, Fats can sometimes be an area where we can say, I need to trim some calories. Maybe I can cut down my portions of higher fat foods. Maybe I can choose leaner foods that don't have all that fat, meaning like leaner meats or leaner animal products. Um, that's an easy way. But like I said, we don't want to cut fat altogether. Usually about 30% of our calories coming from fat. And I would say for, the average female who's trying to lose weight, 50 grams a day of fat is kind of a typical number to shoot for. So now let's just look at all of these macros. How can we put this all into action? It seems like a lot. Where do I begin? I always start with protein. I think protein is by far the most important of all of these things. You can break it up. You can try to shoot for 25 to 30 grams per meal. When you know your macronutrient kind of goals, so maybe, based off of your height, your age, your weight, your wellness goals, maybe you're shooting for 120 grams of protein or 140 grams of protein per day. You can break that up into however many meals or snacks you have. But I feel like a good rule of thumb is at least 25 to 30 grams per meal and about 10 to 15 grams per snack. Number two, always add in your vegetables. One serving is going to be 1 cup of raw or a half cup of cooked. Say try to add in at least a couple servings in your lunch and dinner meals and at least a serving in your breakfast meals. Third area, choose those whole unprocessed carbs, right? So the biggest thing with carbohydrates, I think, is not necessarily the types we're eating, but more how much we're eating, because they're so easy to overeat because they don't give us that feeling of fullness or satiety. They're ones that, that's why we can sit down and with a box of crackers or a bag of chips, is because they don't make us feel full, and they're a lot of them, especially the ones that have the sugar and the salt, they're called hyper palatable, just meaning they are made so that you struggle to eat just one. They something about the texture, the taste, they make you want to eat more. So, there are certain ones that if you can't stop at one, if you have to eat loads of, maybe those are ones that you don't necessarily have around your house. The more you can go back to that whole unprocessed, you're going to find that they aren't quite so hyper palatable, and they do fill you up a little better, but that usually means because they have fiber in them, and that fiber is filling you up a little bit more than the ones that are super refined and processed. Okay. And using portion control. So trying to limit yourself to maybe 1 or 2 servings per meal or snack. If we're looking at pasta or rice or potatoes, maybe trying to stick to somewhere between a half to 1 cup per meal, depending on what your total calorie goals are or your wellness goals. And then 4, we're going to add in those quality fats. Now, just remember that typically those fats are already in a lot of those animal products. It's not, we necessarily don't need to say, I need to add more butter, I need to add more mayonnaise to try to get more fat in my diet. That's usually not the case. We're usually getting plenty when it comes to the foods we're choosing. But, if you find that you need to add in some more omega-3 fatty acids, so trying to maybe get that fatty fish in, or maybe you're trying to eat an extra serving of, walnuts or almonds or pecans or something like that to try to give yourself a little bit of extra fat. Those, we do know that that's going to help us to feel fuller. And then lastly, just balancing your meals. So rather than rather than having a 200 calorie breakfast and a 200 calorie lunch and then wondering why you are so starving hungry and overeating and unable to stop yourself in the evenings, trying to balance those meals out, maybe trying to shoot for 400 to 500 calories per meal. That includes your breakfast, your lunch, trying to hit maybe a couple hundred calorie snacks so that you are more in control by the end of the day, because your body has been well nourished and has been well fed. So breaking up your meals and snacks and trying to make them a bit more balanced is just a little bit is going to help to create that longer term energy throughout the day and help to provide a little bit, help you to have a little bit more control. And that is all I have for the macronutrient module. Please let me know if you have any questions. Have a fantastic day.